There we're live. You're not live. You're watching this at some other time, but we're live right now.
You're doing a Facebook Live? That's cool.
No, I'm just recording it. I'm just recording this. So in case we ever have to use it, I don't have to do all of it again, that kind of thing.
Well, yeah, I knew that, but you just said we were live, so I thought maybe it was.
Yeah. Anybody have anything before we start?
Well, my kids were up late, and I blowing in his mind because it just flipped over to page 202, and I was like, you know what the chance of protein molecules starting life on its own is? It's 10 to the 243 third power, and now I was trying to teach her about second law of thermodynamics and entropy blend, and she's like, I'm not in school yet.
Oh, you're talking about your Frank Turek and Geisler book? Is that what you're talking about? You flipped to that?
It's on page 202.
Oh, you're talking about your basic theology
So we
book.
were up late, and I was just like, well, I'm just going to have a teachable moment since you're up.
Teachable moment. This will be a teachable moment.
This is only basic theology. There's deeper stuff. She's like, what?
Yeah.
That's cool.
That's true, man. So let's pray real fast. Dear Lord, we thank you for this time. God, I pray that you would just conquer all my limitations in regard to, just being tired and ill and hungry and all those silly things. Lord, I pray that you would still come and do what you would have done, Lord, what you would want to be done. I pray that your will would be invincible this evening and always, and not only just in general, but even in our own lives, Jesus. Help us to be what you would have us to be, Jesus, in all situations, in all circumstances, God. I pray that you would come, Lord, here in a special way tonight. We know that you are omnipresent, Lord. You can't not be causally active and aware at all given points and places in the universe. But, Lord, we still know that you come in a special way, Lord, among your people. And, God, we pray that you would be with us tonight, whatever that would mean, and however you would desire, so desire, Lord. Please quicken our minds, Lord, and soften our hearts. Please be merciful to us, especially me, a sinner. It's in your name we pray. Amen. As we start this, I just want to give you guys a thought I was having just, I think it was yesterday, driving in the old minivan. And I was just thinking about how, as Christians, and even people that aren't necessarily even Christian, just culturally Christian, just even their basic conception of God, do you realize, man, how just radically good it is? And I mean, I'm using that word good for all it's worth right now. How just radically good it is that God is, that he's God, that he's capital THE, he's the God that is. Think about it. Reality is that God is, that he exists, and that he's that kind of God. He's a God of mercy and forgiveness and love and compassion and truth and justice. Literally this couldn't be the case, but we can maybe say logically possible. Reality didn't have to be that way. What if ultimate reality was just something like the Greek pantheon of gods? What if that was ultimate reality? That there was a God, right? But it was just capricious and jealous, right, in the human sense of the term, and arbitrary and vain and vindictive and spiteful and sometimes good. What if that was ultimate reality? You see what I'm saying? And when you died, you don't even know. I mean, but just think about it though. But if Christianity is true, which I believe that it is, and we believe that it is, but if Christianity is true, think about what ultimate reality is. That's the truth about reality. That's what's in charge. That's what dictates your life and your everyday goings and comings and all those sorts of things. That the God that actually is the Judeo-Christian God who also came as a person. That's reality. It's not like Allah, right? Or again, some Greek pantheon of gods, or that God is completely and 100% impersonal, like that pantheism's true or something, right? That there's just some weird impersonal law of karma that just back and forth, and you're just limited to these endless reincarnations of like that. Like reality is like that God is, and that God is truth, and that God is just and loving. Like that's reality. Like that's ultimate reality is grounded in that. I was just driving the minivan thinking about that. Like, what if, and then being thankful just for that. Like, God, I'm just thankful that that it's you, like that you are, like that you're God. I'm thankful that you are, that's the truth about reality, who and what you are, not this whatever else that it could have been, right? And when I say could have been, of course, I don't mean like metaphysically, like they roll dice and some up high or whatever, like, well, you'll be God and these other ones won't be true. But like in the logical sense, right? Hypothetically, it could have been some other way, right? I mean, think about that. Like, if we really could grasp that, like, I'm talking about people like me and people like you, like, if that really could just click, do you think, like, depression, anxiety, like, things we wrestle, dude, that'd be gone. Now, I'm not saying that, like, we can muster that up. You and I have had these conversations where, a lot of times you'll talk to Christians and they act as if all you got to do is just, like, why don't you just put your oh, I didn't think of that. Well, yeah, okay, I'll just turn there, and then my faith meter bops up. So even that may, it may have to be God that ultimately even gives you that. But just the point is just simply that if that's grasped, you know what I mean? Like everything, like could you imagine anyone even being afraid to die? Like even strong Christians, like, oh yeah, I mean, I'm not afraid to die, but I kind of not looking forward to the process. But you wouldn't even care about the process. Like there's this old quote unquote historical joke, something about how Lazarus was called in, the Lazarus of Scripture. And he's called into the Colosseum, right, when Nero's persecuting all the Christians, all this kind of stuff. So whether this is true or not, probably not, but the point is, there. And so Lazarus is called in the Colosseum, and they're persecuting and killing all the Christians and that kind of thing. And, whoever's in charge of the festivities, right, is like, look, you've got to denounce Jesus or you're going to die. We're going to kill you. And Lazarus, starts laughing. And he's like, do you not hear me? Like, if you do not deny this Jesus called the Christ, like, you're going to die. Like, we will kill you, right? And they just, like, all the mutilated bodies of all these other Christians that have already been torn up and killed, right? And he just starts laughing even harder. And they're like, are we not getting through to you? Like, you missing something? Like, you are going to die. And finally, Lazarus, like, just through his laughter, is like, I've already done that. And it's not even supposed to be like a ha-ha joke. It's just supposed to be like the point of like, what do I have to be afraid? I've already done it. Like, it's not scary. And like, imagine that. Well, why would you laugh at something like that, right? Let's just pretend that that's completely true. Well, why would you laugh at something like that? Because you've grasped that, like what we're talking about. Like you've grasped, it's not just something that you hope to be true, right, in the modern sense of the word hope. Not something you just hope, but like you literally know it, just like you're walking through that door, right? Like I've already walked through this door. Like I know what's on the other side. Like, what are you gonna do, right? So, anyway, I don't even know how I got on that Lazarus. Oh yeah, just grasping. That's what I've been praying like forever now. It's just like, Lord, let let the light bulb just come on in my mind as to the truth. Like, because there's all these little glimpses of it, that kind of thing. But just like we're like, this is ultimate reality. Like, you know what I mean? Like, this is the truth about reality. Like, All right. So what we're going to look at tonight, we were going through the attributes of God's existence, right? Like all these different attributes, right? The communicable attributes, the incommunicable attributes, all that kind of stuff. But we were going to look at specifically, we talked about omnipresence, right, a little bit. We talked about, we mentioned all of them. But what I wanted to kind of key on, and again, because this is just kind of an intro thing, we're not going to be able to go plumb the depths of theology, much less God, right? But kind of key in on two attributes that usually that are usually, how do I want to say it? They're usually the most under attack in some way by non-Christians. And even sometimes Christians struggle with them, right? I forgot my flipping computer, man. Dang. I'm just going to try to wing it on omnipotence. But for the most part, let me ask you guys to see if you can kind of guess where we're going with it. What usually is something the case, somebody usually will attack in regards to God being omnipotent, right? Or God being omniscient. What might, just in case you forgot, omnipotence, remember omni, all potent, power, all powerful, and then omni, and then science, right? All knowledge, right? By the way, who remembers the Omni in Atlanta? Like when I was in high school, you went to the Omni, right? You know why they call it the Omni now? You should. If omni, no, omnipotent, omnipotent, omniscient. What does omni mean? So the omni.
I just said that I thought it meant that it was right.
Oh, I thought, okay. So what do you, now you should know what the omni meant. What was it? Why was it called the Omni?
It's for everything.
Right, because they used it for everything, right? It's all inclusive, money wasting stuff, right? Went to Barnum Bailey Circus in the Omni. Could you imagine playing a football game after the elephants had taken the field? All right, so anyway, I'm gonna get distracted. All right. So omnipotence. What does omnipotence mean? What does it mean to be omnipotent?
All the power.
Right, all power. So how would you define that? What would you say? If somebody's like, well, what does that mean? That God can what?
Do anything.
Does it?
I mean, that's what I was told. I'm sure it's wrong, but.
Right. Well, we just have to be careful, right? When we start to do all this theology stuff, we have to be more precise in our definitions, right? All that kind of stuff. So what might you say? What's another guess? What does it mean to be omnipotent? I mean, that's not wrong, right? We're just trying to narrow it down even a little more. What does it mean to be omnipotent?
What do you say, what was somebody asked to challenge it? So I was thinking that.
Well, a lot of times that's where the tangle comes up because they'll challenge it based on kind of a poor, kind of a sloppy definition of what it means to be omnipotent. A lot of times when we get the definition right, that clears up just by itself a lot of the challenges to what it would mean for God to do
God's
something.
all powerful, why doesn't he stop this terrible suffering or
Okay,
whatever's
all right.
going on, like
So that's how to be teased out.
Nazis or something.
Right, the problem of evil, right? But we'll get to that. But before we even get to that, just what does it mean to be omnipotent? Right. That's kind of a cashing out of a problem that they would try to see with omnipotence. But what would it mean to be omnipotent? That God can do what? That God can do that which
No one else.
it is possible to do, right? So sometimes some would say God can do that which is logically possible, or that God can do that which is logically or metaphysically possible. Some people won't say it that way. Sometimes some people would say it this way: God can do that which is logically and or feasibly possible. Now, a lot of times, because we grow up in a culture where it's just folk theology, and people hear that like, oh crap, that sounds a little scary to me. My God can do anything, man. Like, we'd be like, well, can
I
God?
was thinking it, but not in that voice.
Right. You were thinking it in that voice, right?
No.
But you'll say something like, well, can God lie? Right? And they'll be like, well, God, yeah, God could lie. He just won't, but he could. Like, all right. So first off, we're going to show, we're not even going to go deep into this right here. We're just going to show a couple different scriptures to show, because they'll be sufficient for our point here. But if you look in Hebrews chapter 6, somebody, what are y'all laughing about, you yahoos?
I brought my Bible to class, that's all I'm saying.
Oh, okay. Yeah, keep your back there. All right. Hebrews chapter 6. Look at verse. Where is it? Or is it 11? Maybe it's 11:6. No, it's not that. See why I needed my computer? Because I had all this stuff down on my
Here it
notes.
is, verse 18.
Is it verse 18?
It's talking about God lying in my apologetics Bible.
Okay, yeah. All right, so read it. Read verse 18.
That by.
Well, wait a minute. You got King Jimmy. I'm going to read it. That-
You got New King James. It's not much difference.
There's a little bit of difference. that by two immutable things, in which it is what? Impossible for God to lie. We might have strong consolation of fled for refuge to lay hold of the hope set before us, right?
Mine
Now-
said exactly that same thing.
Right. There we go.
Word
Good.
for word.
Good. We had a crossover moment. It's like you remember those videos? These should be country music, pop music crossover, and like you hear that same song on both stations. You're like, hey, it's a crossover. We had a crossover moment with the King Jimmy version. So basically, the point here is that it's impossible for God. It doesn't say that God can lie and he just won't. God can't. God cannot lie. Now, again, oh no, what does it mean then to be omnipotent, right? Because can't God do anything? Well, apparently he can't lie, right? Now, there's another one here. And where's the other one at? Because it's right here. Somewhere with it. Does it have it mentioned in your little thing, in your little side notes you had, Ben? If not, I can just do it off memory, but I want to be able to at least point you to the address.
I don't think it does.
Oh, here we go. Yeah, 13, verse 13. For when God made a promise to Abraham, so first off, if God makes a promise, can he lie? No, he can't lie, right? So by default, that means if God makes a promise, he can't break a promise, right? What are you laughing at?
I just love this verse, and it's in the Old Testament so many times. I just imagine all of us, like, growing up, people be like, I swear to God, I swear, like, God's like, I swear to myself. I just love it. Like, there's no higher power.
For when God made a promise to Abraham, because he could swear by no one greater, he swore by himself, saying, surely blessing I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply you. Now, what can God also not do right off the bat right there? What can God also not do based on that verse?
Oh,
Break a promise.
Well, no, we got that one from 18. But he also, here's something else he can't do. What can he not do? He can't swear by anyone greater than himself. Why not? Because there's not one, right? But the point simply being, and again, we're just going to use those two scriptures because that's sufficient to show the point that it's not just some philosophy guy, right, that's trying to say, well, we're just letting philosophy influence our theology and all that.
This says here, it says some skeptics see a contradiction in this verse which says that it is impossible for God to lie because Jeremiah 32:27 and Matthew 19:26 saying that nothing is impossible for God.
Right, that's what we're getting at.
Yeah.
So a lot of times people will say, and they'll say, but wait a minute, I thought you even said that, right? In the verse in Matthew, that Jesus says that nothing is impossible for God, but it's not possible for God to lie. It's not possible for God to have a name higher than himself to swear to, right? So this is what we get to when we talk about what it means to be omnipotent. Now here's the good news. This isn't a new 1900s something philosophy guy that came along and decided that this is what omnipotence would mean. Again, this just shows you the sad reality of folk theology, right, in the past 150 years or so in the modern church, right? So omnipotence has been defined this way for thousands of years by Christians, right? Namely, Thomas Aquinas by one, right? Augustine, right? Literally, Augustine is 1,500 years ago, right? Well, why? Because they had to think, right? Because back in the day, you had to think. And so that's what I want to put on the table first off, is that this isn't a modern notion that we're trying to redefine what it means for God to be omnipotent because we're scared of some sort of modern philosophical crap, right? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about that because this is just what it has always meant to be omnipotent. So again, if you have the guys like, well, that's not what I've always taught to be omnipotent. Well, it's just, well, you got to go back further, right? Right, yeah, you may not have been taught that, right, in the middle of the pine trees over here where we all grew up, but historically and theologically by faithful men and women of God, right, that's what the term meant, was that omnipotence entailed that God could do that which was either, again, depending on the theologian, how they want to frame it or word it, God could do that which is logically possible, metaphysically possible, or feasible, logically and or feasibly possible, right? Meaning that if there was something that could be done and it didn't create a logical contradiction, then God could what? God could do it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. All right. So, what's that? Oh, yeah. All right, so when we're going to get in this, when we talk about what Emily was talking about a minute ago, we started to touch on about the problem of evil, right? And we'll get on that in a second. But it's important that that's what we mean first, that when God can, we say that God can do anything, right? Or that God can do, as omnipotence, he has all power. It just means that God can do what can be done, right? And we say what can be done, we don't mean like just by us. We're not saying that God is limited about what we can do. We're just mean in the logical sense of that, what can be done. So for instance, and then again, before you get unnerved, we're going to cash it out so it doesn't bother you. But can God create a square circle?
No.
Now, why is that? If God can't create a square circle, why is that not a limit on God's power?
Because as I read ahead, if that's the realm of arithmetic, or as in your example, like math, it's not about power, it's about
Yeah, he kind of words it weird.
what is exact in that realm, is what you're dealing with.
Well, here's the problem. A square circle is what? It's not there. It's nonsense.
Yes.
Now, this is why that's tricky, right? Or can God, right? We'll get to that one in a second. But can God make a square circle? The reason that makes sense or why it's tricky to you is because grammatically, what rule have I broken by saying God can't make a square circle? What grammatical rule have I screwed up there? None. I haven't said anything grammatically incorrect, right? God cannot make a square circle. However, meaningless combinations of words don't give anything meaning just because you can say them grammatically correct. So if I had to translate that logically, it would sound something like this. God can't, what'd I say? Nothing. Like there's nothing there to even that's coherent. There's no such thing as a square circle. Why? Because if it's square, then it's not a circle, right? And if it's a circle, then it's not a square, right? Because that's a contradiction. Even if we want to get more specific, right, the principle of identity, right? If it's a square, then it's just not whatever it's not, right? It is whatever it is, right? So, again, another one. Can God make a married bachelor? That's our go-to, right? Can God create a married bachelor? Again, every kid on the playground is going to say, well, yeah, God can. C.S. Lewis said it this way. Look, meaningless combinations of words don't all of a sudden acquire meaning just because you transfix God can at the end of the sentence. It's nonsense, like Lewis says, nonsense remains nonsense even if you talk nonsense about God. Well, why can't God make a married bachelor? Because there's nothing to make. It's not as if there's this thing, a married bachelor, that could be made and God just can't muster up enough to... It's nonsense. Again, if I were to say that logically, it'd be like, can God make a... You haven't said anything coherent. It doesn't make any friggin' sense, right? Because if you're married, then you're not what? A bachelor. And if you're bachelor, then you're not what? Married. Like those are contradictory concepts. It's not that there's something there that God could make, but he can't. There's nothing there to make. It's like, again, like just saying like, what color is purple's smell? Huh? What is the smell of the number 7's granddad? Now, again, grammatically, did I break any rules? No. But you see what I'm trying to get you to see here? Like logically, what is that? That doesn't mean anything. It's nonsense to say what is the smell of the number 7's granddad. That's just all over the place conceptually. It doesn't make. There's nothing there to. You're loving this, are you not? Like,
I'm sorry, there's a kid at Carrollton named Seven, so I'm just thinking about it.
We got a couple named Seven. I'm not kidding.
now I'm glad. You know what? I'm actually glad you said that because if you didn't hear on there, it said somebody's name was 7.
One at the high school, one in Wilshire. I know it too.
So, but the point is this, and I'm glad you said that, is because a lot of times somebody will say like, aha, 7 can smell a certain way and 7 can have a granddad. Now, what's the problem with that?
7 is not the number.
We're not talking about that, right? This is
Right.
So again, like if I were to say, uno, dos, tres, cuatro, siete, seis, right? Yeah, cinco, seis. Yeah, siete. So if you say another language, you get around the problem because we're not talking about the person of 7. We're talking about whatever that is that all of these different translations make reference to, right? When they talk about that number, right? So, I mean, you'll have students in class do that all the time. They'll say something like, one time, I don't have time to get on that. That's a total sidetrack. But they try to get out of that with things like that. Or even here, like this is chapter 7, right? Like I can look at it, I'm smelling 7's written right. That's not what we're talking about. So omnipotence, it's not, again, God's power is not limited in any way. It's simply there's nothing there to do. Now, back to Jesus' statement then, right? With all things, God is, with all things are possible with God. The key word there is what? All what? Things are possible. If it doesn't exist, if it can't exist, if it's logically contradictory, is it a thing? No. So again, if somebody were to say, can God make a married bachelor? And they said, because Jesus said all things are possible. Was a married bachelor a thing? No. It's a non-existent, right? Non-existents are not, they do not, they cannot, they are not, right? They don't exist. That's the point. Not just that they don't, but they can't. It's logically impossible. Now, here, this should also make you feel better. Sophisticated theists, well, this part's what should make you feel better. Sophisticated theists, of course, but then also sophisticated atheists, they know this too. They agree. It's not as if they try to say, well, you guys are just trying to be inconsistent with what you make. No. Like even sophisticated philosophers of religion that are atheists will also say, yeah, that's ridiculous. Like it'd be silly for some internet atheist guy on YouTube sitting in his mom's basement to try to make some argument about God not being able to do all things in terms of, say, a married bachelor, because that guy obviously he's never had a class in logic. That's just not even a coherent argument. It's logically contradictory. Now, when we get to what Emily was touching on about the problem of evil, that has been an argument that's been issued, because what that tries to do is to show that the concept of omnipotence is that if there is now this is kind of apologetic stuff, so we're kind of touching on apologetics right here tonight. But like, if God is omnipotent and God is all loving, right, omnibenevolent, then there couldn't be evil, right? So they're trying to say, really, the way the argument would cash out would be, well, maybe some other kind of God would exist. But really the point is to say, but what I'm trying to say is there's probably just not a God at all, because I know you guys don't believe in Zeus or Apollo or Thor or Odin or Loki or whatever else, right? But you're talking about the Judeo-Christian conception of God, which would say that God is what? All loving, omnibenevolent, all powerful, omnipotent, all those sorts of things, right? And this is why I say that. And it's been put forth for centuries, right? Probably one of the more strong recent versions would have been something like J.L. Mackie, a philosopher in Australia, an atheist philosopher in Australia. But basically, they're all similar. It runs like this. If God is all good, then he would want to get rid of evil, right? If God were all powerful, then he could get rid of evil. But there's evil. So, either God is all good because he wants to get rid of all evil, but he's not all powerful because he doesn't. Or God is all powerful because he can get rid of evil, but he's not all good because he doesn't. So either way, either God's all good, but he's not all powerful, or God's all powerful, but he's not all good. But hey, who are we kidding? More likely it's what? Probably just that God doesn't exist. You see the point? Now that's been solved 965 ways, from here to next Sunday. But usually the most famous kind of, and even the most conceited version, would be something along the lines of something like Alvin Plantinga's free will defense. And we're not going to get into radical depths of that, but basically it goes back to this, and that's why we had to do all that preface work in regards to what it means to be omnipotent, because his argument goes something roughly like it's the human free will type argument. And the way that works, and the reason Plantinga's works, is because what he wanted to try to do is to cash out that it's a logical contradiction to say, let's assume that human beings have free will, right? That if human beings have free will, he wanted to cash out and really, it's a whole book. The argument is just one whole book. It's called God, Freedom, and Evil by Alvin Plantinga. It's just literally a book of one argument. Just literally, even with symbols and everything, like symbolic logic. But anyway, so basically what he tries to say is, look, it's a logical contradiction to make someone freely do something. You catch that there? It's a logical contradiction for me to make you freely do anything. Because if I make you do it, go back to your married bachelor stuff, right? If I make you do it, are you freely doing it? If you're freely do it, if you're freely doing it, am I making you do it? No, right? So it banks on this notion of what's called libertarian free will and all this kind of stuff. So the point is that, look, yeah, God could, logically speaking, God could make a world in which everybody just does the right thing, right? And then they say, but here's the thing. If it's logically possible that everyone suffers what's called transworld depravity, meaning that if no matter what world God actualized, it's logically possible that there's just no world that God actualizes in which everybody always freely does the right thing. It's just It's just logically possible that there's any world that God actualizes, if they have real free will, and what Plantinga would call significantly free creatures, that if they have free will, it's possible that just nobody, or that somebody, or that all people just always choose to do wrong things. Not at every given moment of the day, but just over the course of their life, people don't always do the right things because God can't make them, having free will, do that, which is whatever else. Does that make sense? And then so even like somebody like Mackey concedes the problem of evil. He's like, yeah, okay, there's no problem of evil. There's no logical contradiction in saying that evil exists and an omnipotent and omnibenevolent God exists. Just still don't believe in God, but he's like, okay, there's no logical I'll concede there's no logical contradiction. Are you following that? That's a lot. Right off the bat. Good news, we got even more. So if you don't get that, you're about to not even get even more, right? But that's usually the biggest thing in regards to God's omnipotence, the charge that goes after God's omnipotence, right? The other one's the stupid playground version. You've probably heard this one, and you probably dismissed it, and now when we say it again, you're like, oh yeah, it's more interesting than I thought it was when I was a kid. But it's this one: can God make a rock so heavy you can't lift it? And as a kid, you're like, huh, whatever. Hey, I'm next on the slide. Get out of the way. But if you think about it, that's supposed to go after omnipotence. How? Because if God can't make a rock, right, so heavy that he can't even lift it, well, there's something God can't do. How, on the other hand, if God what?
God can't lift it, then he's...
Right, if he can't make it, there's something he can't do. But if he can and can't lift it, then there's something God can't do. Right, you see that? Now, the problem with that is, again, it goes back to, and we don't have time to get into all the details of it, but it's basically another just incoherent problem. Think of it this way. It's like saying, can I beat myself at arm wrestling? Well, I mean, because if I beat myself, right, then I lose. But then if I lose, then I also won. You see, that's just nonsense. So you can't win, but you also can't lose, but then you can't lose because you also can't win. Right, which doesn't mean anything. Again, it's nonsense. You can't pit yourself against yourself and expect there to be any sort of coherent response in that. However, the payoff is this then. Does that also entail that I couldn't be the most ultimate arm wrestler ever? Obviously, I'm not. But if I were, right, let's say that I just happen to be literally the world champion. Does it entail that because I can't beat myself because I'd lose to myself, but then if I won, I'd also lose? Does it also entail that I couldn't exist and I also couldn't have the whatever the term would be for all powerful arm wrestler of the world? No, I could still be there, right? So obviously there's something wrong with the objection, right? And so most, again, sophisticated types of philosophers of religion, whether they're atheists or theists, would both say, yeah, that kind of stuff's just silly, right? And remember the Simpsons cartoon version, remember Homer Simpson's, the thing was, can God heat up a taco so hot that even he can't eat it? Right, it's the same thing as The Rock, but same thing. I'm not endorsing The Simpsons. I just actually read that in a book or in a lecture, or heard it in a lecture or something. But that was The Simpsons version. All right, so does anybody want to say anything in regards to omnipotence before? Again, we could do this the whole rest of our lives, but we need to get on to omniscience for a minute, just to kind of look at the charge of what the usual, and I guarantee you that at least at least half of you have thought this one before. So do any of you have anything in regards to omnipotence before we go on to omniscience real quickly?
Well, if we were like robots, it kind of reminds me of the Giver.
The what?
The Giver.
Giver.
I don't know what y'all talking about.
People were like programmed to do right all the time, and
Oh, yeah.
it was just,
But I don't know what The Giver is. Is that like a movie or something?
The new book.
it's a living book, I guess, literature.
A living book?
Yeah,
What's a living book?
like they're worth reading.
A living book?
Yeah.
I've never heard of a living book. I mean, I've heard
It's
like.
because your kids aren't in middle school yet. It's like a required middle school
Yeah.
book.
Oh, I thought you were saying like.
What? Does it have an award on it or some kind of?
Oh, yeah.
I thought that was the gold medallion winner.
They have lots of
You
different.
have to run in school.
It may
Huh?
not be
You
in
have to
the
run in
book.
school.
I didn't
Yeah,
read it. I didn't hear about it till.
I don't remember it, but I know it's required.
Dude, you gotta remember, dude, I'm in my 40s. Like, we were still reading hieroglyphics when I was in school.
I'm 5 years behind you, and I read in school.
Yeah,
so.
man, but see, like, I was born in the 70s,
No, 79.
which is
November
the,
of 79.
which is, I forgot 79 is not the 70s, that's the 90s.
The same thing is like Divergent, you know, in the antagonistic way, like shoots up the guy, like her boyfriend with this chemical, like makes him do stuff.
Yeah. Like the Stepford Wives. I never saw that, but that's always the example given in these kind of discussions, right? Stuff like that. Just anytime you've got any puppet type example. By the way, this is always one of the. I'm not going there. All right, so omniscience. What is omniscience? What is it? You're like, well, now I don't want to answer it. Anybody else want to say anything about omnipotence while I'm flipping over to this? What do you keep laughing about, man? So like hardcore laughing the whole time. What? No, what is it? She just gave me the most hardcore, like, stop asking face, like nothing. Literally like this. All right, so I'm just going to read
We're
this.
live. Keep going.
What?
So we're live. Keep going.
No, we're not. This is pre-recorded for your listening and viewing pleasure. All right, spew that water out. Go, spew it.
Good.
Historic. I'm going to read you this. This is guys. If you haven't figured it out, I'm not in that book today because we're going into a little more deeper stuff with guys that are here. All right. Historically, the omniscience of God is a straightforward doctrine. God knows everything, past, present, and future. He knows the actual and the possible. Only the impossible, because again, we're getting back to here. What is it? Only the impossible, the contradictory, is outside the knowledge of God. So again, we're getting back to this notion of that. Now you've got him laughing.
Sorry.
Now anybody I look at. All right, the contemporary debate, however, has changed the theological landscape. And we're not going to necessarily get into that. There's just a contemporary debate. It's called open theism. See, I know it's not my zipper because I've got on these athletic shorts. Now,
Why you at all? It's in my head.
it's not you, it's me.
She was just hungry. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I always die laughing when I'm hungry. So we're not getting into open theism. Open theism is a new movement, even within some Christian circles, that would say that God is, he can't know future events because it's logically impossible. And they try to argue that it's logically impossible to know future events because it hasn't happened yet. You can't know what isn't real. Does that make sense? So they try, like it's based off the view roughly of presentism. So that presentism is the view in philosophy of time that the only real thing, the only real event is right now. So like all right, am I going to send you out in the hall? Or put your name on the board?
Just quit looking at her.
Well, I mean, you look at people and then you look at one and one's like,
Just have her turn around.
it's not like I have like hundreds of people to choose from. I mean, I go around the room and 3 people are in hysterics.
I promise I will get myself together.
Yeah. All right, so open theism just roughly says that God can't know future events, right? And they try to argue that that's completely compatible with Orthodox Christian faith. Historically, of course, we would deny that open theism can be true because we want to say that there's strong biblical precedent, and then we would want to argue also philosophically and theologically that God does know the future. By way of probably the most obvious examples that we point to prophecy, right? Like, what does it mean to say that God can't know the future and also say that prophecy is true? Or specifically, even how do you know that even how do you know prophecy is guaranteed to even actually be the case, right? How can you guarantee, like, say, read the end times events or all these kind of things, right? How do you know that could even happen, right? Even Old Testament prophecies, if God can't really know. So anyway, we're not even going there. We're going to go with did I even get through with the definition because of all this, flipping rodeo clowns out here? So most theologians too would say something like this, that God knows all true propositions, right? That if it's true, then God knows it. So before we get into the more common one, let me go ahead and introduce this one to you too, because you might have thought of this, but a lot of times people would say that it's incoherent for God to be omniscient because God can't know what it's like to be you, right? And if God knows all things, right? Well then, how could God know what it's like to be you, right? And that gets into aspects of, what it means for subjective experiences to be true, because I can't know. There's a very famous argument composed by an atheist philosopher named Thomas Nagel, and gosh, I hope you don't start laughing at this because it really is entitled "What It's Like to Be a Bat." But he does that kind of purposefully, like humorously, because his argument is that you can't know, like it's literally impossible, even if you turned into a bat, right? Like if you had wings, you would know what it's like for you to be like a bat, but you could never know what it's like to be a bat because you are you. I would say it this way, per just the law of identity, right? You can't not be you. You can just know what it'd be like for you to be experience life as a fill in the blank. So for instance, like I can't ever know what it's like to be Stacy, right? And vice versa. Well, why? Because I'm Russ, right? I even if we somehow, like what's the movie? Freaky Friday or whatever, and we switch bodies on, and I'm going around, I'm like, oh, now I know what it's like to be you. No, it wouldn't. I would know what it's like to be me as basically wearing a costume of you, but I couldn't know what it's like to be you because it's completely subjective. It's a subjective experience, right? So again, going back to a law of non-contradiction, all these kind of things, we would say that doesn't entail, and again, even a lot of sophisticated atheistic philosophers would agree too. It's no, that's logically impossible for somebody else to be somebody else, to know what they know in the subjective sense, not because it's something they can't do, because it's impossible, right? In the sense of then it would be you knowing it, not them knowing it as you, all this kind of stuff. But anyway, we're not even getting into that. But that's another one of the kind of the newer things that makes around sometimes, that God can't be omniscient because God can't know those types of subjective truths, that kind of thing, right? But again, God just knows all true propositions, right? Now, here's the one you've probably heard of and have come across, even probably yourself. I said probably half of you guys at least have thought about just on yourself. Who has ever thought about, or at least heard, maybe even if you haven't thought about it, that if God is omniscient, meaning that God knows all things that will happen, right? Let's just word it like that for a minute, that God knows everything that will actually happen. So for instance, like God knows exactly what you'll do tomorrow at 1:36 p.m., right? God knows exactly what you'll be doing and how you'll be doing it and where you'll be doing it, right? That kind of stuff. If that's true, if God knows all things and God knows exactly what you're going to do at any given point, right? Then can you be free? Because it can't not be, right? Like for tomorrow, if you're gonna go pick up a book, all right, and read a book at 1:36, can it be said that you're actually? How is it not just, again, this is called fatalism? How is it not just determined? Because it can't, if God knows it, it can't not happen, right? So how can it be the case that you're free if what you're going to do is already determined in the sense that God knows it? All right, so you're saying God, He's not making you do it, right? But I'm going to keep pushing a little bit. So, all right, if God knows that I'm going to turn this page right here, could I not have done that? If God knows, like say yesterday, like yeah, exactly this time, Russ, right now is going to turn the page. Could I not have done that? Could I not have done it?
You could have not done it, but then you would have known you were not going to do it.
Right. So then, could I not have done it? Could I not have? So are you really free? Do you really have free will if everything is determined in the sense that God knows exactly? Are you really free? Because you can't not do what you're going to do tomorrow because God knows it.
Yeah, but like I know what Chad's gonna say if I tell him something. Doesn't mean I'm controlling him.
But do you really?
Yes. Depending on what I'm telling him, yes, I know what he's gonna say.
But you don't really know.
But I do.
Not really.
Not everything, but I'm just saying, if
Aha.
I said a certain thing, I know what he would say. So that's what I'm saying.
I'm not even going to ask.
I'm just saying, like, in general, like if I said I love you, I know what he would say back. That doesn't mean I made him do it. But if
Alright.
he didn't tell me, I would be mad. I'm just kidding. I'm just saying, you get what I'm saying? Like, some things you just know.
Yeah, but I'm trying to get you to give some stronger examples. Because, I mean, we can concede that we don't know what, I don't know what Allison's going to say. I mean, I think sometimes I have a decent clue, but I don't know. Right? Like, it's not like I know, there's zero, she has to say this. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
And I'm going to,
But even if you knew 100% what she was going to say, that doesn't mean that you controlled it.
all right. So let me say it this way. First, I'm going to be honest. Like, this one has just never bothered me. This isn't one that I mean, I've heard it, you know, obviously, and you hear it throughout your whole life, even if you're not even interested in philosophy, and you're kind of, oh, yeah, that's neat. But this has never been one of those like, oh man, like, and I'll tell you why. And I'm not even going to go into the more sophisticated thing, like William Lane Craig. He's a philosopher, a Christian philosopher, and he likes to talk about how this commits the modal fallacy in modal logic, because basically it's kind of saying the same thing that, and he goes to the syllogism for you that if something basically the point, the fallacy is trying to say that if something, God knows something, it'll necessarily happen, right? And Craig is saying like, no, it won't necessarily happen just because God knows it by necessity, that kind of thing. But anyway, we're not getting into that. I think it can just be pointed out more easily, kind of touching on what you're saying, Stacy, is that it's really difficult to see how knowledge is causal. Does that make sense? Like, how is it that knowledge itself is causal? Like, it doesn't seem to be that knowledge has any sort of causal property to it. So, for instance, imagine, I'll give two quick examples, one better than the other. Imagine that, let's say that I'm watching a pre-recorded, let's say I'm watching this, right? Later. I know exactly, and you know exactly, like right now, you can even time it, you know everything, I'm going to do this, right? You knew exactly what I was going to do, but did your knowing that cause me to do it? Does that make sense? Or if you watch a football game pre-recorded and you know what's going to happen at the 3 seconds left in the game, and but you knowing that, does that cause that to happen? Now, some would say that's a false analogy. You could like, yeah, but that's already happened, and you know it. But right, but if God sees things like that, right, then God, the point would just simply be that God what?
Just knows it.
Right, or the analogy that's supposed to be similar there is that knowledge itself is not causal to the particular thing. Or again, if you were standing at the corner of a building and you saw one car coming this way and one car coming this way, they didn't see each other, but you know they're going to hit each other, right? Mm-hmm. But you're not causing the accident, even though you know what's going to happen. It's just really hard for me. Now, some people, they may stumble around on this one, but this one never really that big a deal to me because I've just never... It's really been hard for me to see how knowledge is causal. Like that there's a causal relationship between knowing and happening. Outside of your own, again, say subjective experience or whatever. Right? That kind of thing. Where are you going? You gotta pick up a kid. You got something you gotta tell us? You have a kid you gotta pick up?
Go for an extra hour, I'll sit here.
Yeah, I mean, you're like, one other person was like, this thing's going like. So, but anyway, that's it. Maybe we'll finish it up or some concluding thoughts next week.